Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Ethan Caldwell's Seattle penthouse, the city's skyline blurred into a mosaic of gray and neon. The storm had followed him from San Francisco, where he'd cut short a tech conference filled with hollow handshakes and veiled threats from competitors. Ethan, a billionaire at 38, had built his empire on predictive algorithms, but no algorithm could have predicted the exhaustion weighing on his shoulders as he stepped off the private elevator into his sanctuary. He loosened his charcoal tie, the tailored navy suit still crisp despite the red-eye flight. All he wanted was silence, the kind his wealth was supposed to buy, a sterile, ordered quiet that his 5,000-square-foot penthouse atop the Columbia Center promised. He dropped his leather briefcase by the door, the faint scent of polished wood and lavender cleaner greeting him. Home. But as he kicked off his shoes, a sound pierced the stillness, soft, high-pitched, unmistakably out of place, out of children's laughter. It came from the kitchen, a muffled giggle followed by a shushing whisper. Ethan's jaw tightened. He didn't have children. He didn't allow children. His staff knew this. His housekeeper, Maria Alvarez, knew this. The rules were clear: no guests, no disruptions, no exceptions. His strides quickened, and Italian loafers silent on the hardwood, as he moved toward the source of the noise, his pulse ticking up with irritation. The kitchen, a sleek expanse of marble and stainless steel, came into view, and what he saw stopped him dead. Maria Alvarez, in her navy uniform and yellow gloves, stood at the island, scrubbing a spotless countertop with mechanical precision. But it wasn't her presence that made Ethan's blood run hot. It was the three children sprawled on a patchwork of blankets on the floor, a makeshift camp in his pristine kitchen. A girl, maybe 6, with dark braids clutched a tattered stuffed rabbit, whispering to a boy of about 4, who was stacking plastic cups. A toddler no older than 2 lay curled against a pillow, thumb in mouth, eyes half closed. Their clothes were clean, but worn, their shoes scuffed. Toys, cheap, colorful things were scattered around them, an alien invasion in Ethan's curated world. Maria hadn't noticed him yet, her focus split between the counter and the children. "Quiet, mija," she murmured to the girl, her voice low-accented, strained. "Don't wake Luis." Ethan's voice cut through the air like a blade. "What the hell is this?" Maria froze her sponge, halting mid-scrub. Slowly she turned her brown eyes wide, but not surprised, as if she'd been dreading this moment. The children looked up the girl's face, tightening with fear. The boy pausing mid-stack. The toddler stirred, blinking sleepily. Maria straightened, pulling off her gloves with deliberate calm, though her hands trembled slightly. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, her voice steady despite the tension in her posture. "You're back early." Ethan's eyes narrowed, his tone sharp enough to slice through the storm outside. "That's your opening line. You turn my kitchen into a daycare, and you're surprised I'm here. Explain. Now." The girl tugged at Maria's sleeve, whispering, "Tia, is he mad?" Maria knelt, briefly brushing the girl's cheek. "It's okay, Sophia. Stay with Diego." She rose, facing Ethan, her expression a mix of exhaustion and defiance. "They're my cousin's children, Sophia, Diego, and Luis. I didn't have anywhere else to take them." Ethan stepped closer, his shadow falling over the blankets. "Your cousin's children," he repeated, voice low, dangerous. "And you thought my home, my private residence, was the place to bring them, without asking, without a word." His gaze flicked to the children, who shrank under his scrutiny. Sophia clutched her rabbit tighter. Diego's cups toppled, and Luis whimpered softly. Maria instinctively moved between Ethan and the kids, her body a shield. "It's been 1 week, sir." "Just 1 week. I didn't plan this. Their mother, my cousin Anna, died 2 months ago. Car accident. Their father's been gone for years. My aunt was caring for them, but she's sick, too weak to handle 3 kids. I had no choice." Ethan's lip curled, his patience fraying. "No choice. You had choices. A shelter. Social services. Anything but sneaking them into my house like I wouldn't notice. Do you know what this looks like? You're stealing from me. My space. My trust." Maria's eyes flashed, but her voice stayed controlled, though it carried a tremor. "Stealing. I've been cleaning your house, cooking your meals, keeping everything perfect, all while making sure they don't touch a thing. I don't sleep, sir. I work. I care for them. I pray they stay quiet. You think I wanted this?" Ethan's hand clenched into a fist, his knuckles whitening. "You don't get to decide what's convenient for you in my home. You're paid to follow rules, not break them. 1 week, Maria. 1 week of lying to me." He gestured at the blankets, the toys, the children. "This isn't a charity. This is my life. My space. You've crossed a line." Maria's breathing hitched, but she didn't back down. She adjusted Luis, who clung to her leg, his tiny fingers gripping her uniform. "I know I broke your rules. I know I risked my job. But you don't know what it's like out there, Mr. Caldwell. Seattle's shelters. They're not safe for kids like these. The system, it chews them up. Sophia's already afraid of strangers. Diego doesn't talk much since his mom died. Luis cries if I'm not holding him. My aunt begged me not to let them go. She said, 'Maria, you're all they have.' So yes, I brought them here. I thought I could keep it hidden until I found another way." Ethan's jaw tightened, his voice dropping to a growl. "You thought wrong. You think I built this." He gestured to the penthouse, the city beyond the windows, by letting people bend the rules, by letting chaos into my life. Maria's lips trembled, but her gaze held his, unyielding. "No, sir. I think you built it, by making choices others were too weak to make. And I'm making mine. I chose them." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she pressed a hand to Sophia's shoulder, grounding herself. The girl looked up, eyes wide, sensing the weight of the moment. Ethan paced a step, his mind racing. He wanted to fire her, to restore order, to erase this disruption. But something in her words, the raw, unapologetic truth, caught him off guard. He'd faced down boardrooms, lawsuits, and hostile takeovers, but this was different. This was personal, messy, human. The toddler Luis fussed, his soft cry cutting through the tension. Maria knelt, scooping him up, whispering, "Shh, pequeño, está bien." Her voice was gentle, but her shoulders were rigid, braced for Ethan's verdict. He stared at her, then at the children. Sophia's rabbit was threadbare, its ear half torn. Diego's cups were mismatched, likely scavenged from a thrift store. Luis's tiny sneakers had holes in the toes. These weren't just kids. They were evidence of a life Ethan had never touched, a struggle he'd never known. His phone buzzed in his pocket, shattering the moment. He glanced at the screen, a text from his COO Rachel. "Urgent data breach. Press is sniffing. Call me." Ethan's stomach twisted. A corporate storm was brewing, and here he was dealing with a housekeeper who'd turned his sanctuary into a nursery. He locked eyes with Maria, his voice cold but less certain. "This isn't over. They can't stay here. You have until morning to figure it out." Maria nodded, her face unreadable, though her eyes had glistened. "I understand, sir." She turned back to the children kneeling to gather their toys, her movements slow, deliberate, as if savoring every second she had left in this space. Ethan turned away, his footsteps heavy, as he headed to his study. The storm outside roared, louder rain hammering the windows, but it was the image of Maria alone, defiant, surrounded by 3 small lives, that lingered in his mind. He shut the study door, the click echoing like a gavel, but the weight in his chest didn't lift. As he dialed Rachel to face the corporate crisis, a single thought gnawed at him. What kind of man sends 3 children into a storm? The rain hadn't stopped a relentless Seattle drizzle that coated Ethan Caldwell's penthouse windows in a shimmering veil. Inside, the air felt heavier than the storm outside, thick with the unresolved tension from the night before. Ethan stood by the floor-to-ceiling glass in his study, staring at the city below its lights, smudged by the weather. His phone lay on the desk, buzzing intermittently with messages from Rachel, his COO. Each one a reminder of the corporate firestorm brewing. A data breach at Caldwell Analytics, his tech empire had leaked client data, and the press was circling like vultures. But Ethan's mind wasn't on the boardroom. It was on Maria Alvarez and the 3 children who'd turned his sterile world upside down. He'd given her until morning to get them out, but as dawn broke, he hadn't enforced it. Not yet. The image of Sophia's threadbare rabbit, Diego's silent stacking of cups, and Luis's tiny, hole-ridden sneakers clung to him like damp clothes. He rubbed his temples, trying to shake the unease. He was Ethan Caldwell, a man who solved problems with precision, not pity. Yet Maria's words, "I chose them," echoed a challenge to his carefully constructed life. Downstairs, the kitchen was quiet. Too quiet. Ethan descended the spiral staircase, expecting to find Maria packing up the children's makeshift camp. Instead, the blankets were neatly folded, the toys gone, and Maria stood at the counter chopping vegetables for his usual lunch, grilled salmon with a kale salad, precise as always. The children were nowhere in sight. "Where are they?" Ethan asked, his voice sharper than intended. Maria didn't look up, her knife moving rhythmically. "At the community center, sir. A friend is watching them." Her tone was flat professional, but her eyes were red-rimmed, as if she'd spent the night wrestling with more than just exhaustion. Ethan leaned against the island, arms crossed. "Good. That's where they belong. Not here." Maria's knife paused just for a second before resuming. "Yes, sir," she said, but the words carried a weight that made Ethan's jaw tighten. He wanted to press her, to demand why she hadn't told him sooner, but his phone buzzed again. Another text from Rachel Board, "Wants answers by noon. Call now." He ignored it, his gaze fixed on Maria. "You said they're your cousin's kids. What happened to her?" Maria set the knife down, her hands steadying against the counter. She looked at him, her brown eyes raw but unflinching. "Anna was my cousin, more like a sister. She died 2 months ago. A drunk driver on I-5. She was coming home from her night shift at the hospital. She was a nurse. Sophia was in the car, saw it all. She hasn't slept through the night since." Maria's voice cracked, but she pushed on. "Diego and Luis were with my aunt, thank God, but their father, he left when Luis was born. No note, no money, nothing. Anna raised them alone, and when she died, my aunt took them in, but she's 68, diabetic, her knees are shot. She fell last week trying to carry Luis. I couldn't leave them with her anymore." Ethan's chest tightened, but he kept his face impassive. "So you brought them here, to my home, without a word." Maria nodded, wiping her hands on her apron. "I thought I could manage. Work here, keep them quiet, find a solution. I was wrong, and I'm sorry, but I couldn't let them go to a shelter. You don't know what happens to kids like them in this city." Ethan's mind flashed to headlines he'd skimmed overcrowded shelters, kids lost in foster care stories he'd dismissed as someone else's problem. He pushed off the counter, pacing. "You should have told me from the start. I could have—" He stopped. Could have, what? Fired her sooner, paid for a hotel. He didn't know, and that uncertainty gnawed at him. Maria's voice softened, but it wasn't weak. "I was afraid, Mr. Caldwell. Afraid you'd see me as a liability. Afraid I'd lose this job. It's not just about me, it's about them. Every dollar I earn goes to their food, their clothes, their medicine, Sam." Ethan's eyes flicked to the counter, where a small, empty pill bottle sat unnoticed until now. The label read, "Amoxicillin, Luis Alvarez." His stomach twisted. "You're paying for their medicine," Maria nodded, almost defiant. "My aunt's Social Security barely covers her rent. I do what I have to." The room felt smaller, the air pressing in. Ethan's phone buzzed again, but he silenced it. He needed airspace, something to clear the fog in his head. "I'm going out," he said abruptly, grabbing his coat. Maria said nothing, just resumed chopping, but her silence felt louder than any argument. Ethan took the elevator to the lobby, the storm outside now a steady drizzle. He walked without a plan, his feet carrying him toward Belltown, where the community center Maria mentioned stood a squat brick building wedged between a coffee shop and a thrift store. He didn't know why he was here, only that he couldn't stay in the penthouse with her words looping in his mind. Inside the center buzzed with life seniors playing cards, teens shooting hoops, and in a corner, a group of kids painting on butcher paper. Maria was there, kneeling beside Sophia, guiding her hand to dip a brush in red paint. Diego sat nearby, stacking blocks, while Luis napped in a stroller. Maria's face was softer here, her smile genuine, as she praised Sophia's messy heart shape. Ethan stood by the door unnoticed, feeling like an intruder in a world he didn't understand. A volunteer, a woman with graying curls, approached him. "You looking for someone?" Ethan hesitated, then nodded toward Maria. "Just checking in." The woman's eyes lit up. "Maria's a godsend here. Volunteers every weekend, even with those kids to juggle. She's teaching them to read, you know. Most folks would have given up by now." Ethan's throat tightened. He watched as Diego handed Maria a block, his small face brightening when she ruffled his hair. Sophia looked up, spotting Ethan, and her smile faded. She tugged at Maria's sleeve, whispering. Maria glanced over, her expression shifting from surprise to guarded caution. She stood brushing paint from her hands and walked over. "Mr. Caldwell, I didn't expect you here," Ethan shrugged, unsure himself. "Needed a walk. You mentioned this place." Maria's eyes searched his, wary. "It's where I bring them when I can. It's safe. They get to be kids here." Before Ethan could respond, Sophia ran up, holding out her painting. "Tia, look," she said, then froze, seeing Ethan. Her eyes dark and wide, locked onto him. "Why don't you smile?" she asked, her voice small but direct. Ethan blinked, caught off guard. Maria knelt, smoothing Sophia's braid. "He's just tired, mija. Go finish your heart." Sophia hesitated, then scampered back. Ethan felt the question like a pinprick. He didn't smile. Not here, not at board meetings, not in the life he'd built. Maria stood, her voice low. "She notices things. Too much sometimes." Ethan nodded, his gaze drifting to a bulletin board covered in photos. One caught his eye. A woman with his sister's eyes, laughing with Maria at a community event. His heart stuttered. Claire, his estranged sister, gone for years after a fight he barely remembered. "Who's that?" he asked, pointing. Maria's face tightened. Someone who used to come here. She's gone now. Ethan's pulse quickened. Gone? How Maria hesitated, then said, "She passed away. A long time ago." The words hit like a punch. Ethan turned away, his mind reeling. Claire, here. With Maria. He needed answers, but his phone buzzed again, this time a call from Rachel. He answered, stepping outside. "Ethan, it's bad, Rachel," said her voice tight. "The breach is public. Twitter's exploding. We need you at the office now." Ethan glanced back at the center where Maria was helping Diego stack blocks, her face a mask of quiet strength. "I'll be there in an hour," he said, hanging up. The drizzle soaked his coat, but he barely noticed. Maria's life, her sacrifice, her struggle, was a mirror he wasn't ready to face. And that photo of Claire, a ghost from his past, was a crack in the armor he'd spent years forging. As he walked back to his penthouse, the city's hum felt distant, drowned out by a single thought. What had he missed? And what was he still ignoring? The Seattle waterfront was a blur of mist and motion, the Puget Sound churning under a sky that refused to clear. Ethan Caldwell gripped the steering wheel of his Tesla, the wipers slashing rhythmically against the rain. Beside him, Maria Alvarez sat rigid, her hands clutching the straps of a worn diaper bag, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. In the back seat, Sofia and Diego huddled close, their faces pale, while Luis the toddler whimpered softly, his forehead hot against Maria's arm. The call had come an hour ago. Luis was sick, a fever spiking too fast for comfort. Maria had been at the community center where Ethan had shown up again, still rattled by the photo of his sister Claire on the bulletin board. He hadn't planned to stay, but when Maria's phone rang and her face crumpled, he'd acted without thinking. "I'll drive," he'd said, the words foreign in his mouth. Now, here they were, speeding toward Harborview Medical Center, the city's lights smearing past like watercolor. Ethan's phone buzzed in the console, another call from Rachel, his COO, about the data breach that had set Twitter ablaze. He ignored it. The weight of the moment, of Luis's shallow breaths and Maria's barely concealed panic, was heavier than any boardroom crisis. "You should have called a doctor sooner," Ethan said, his voice low, edged with frustration. Maria didn't look at him, her fingers brushing Luis's damp hair. "I gave him Tylenol yesterday. It was working until this morning." Her tone was steady, but her knuckles were white. "I didn't want to bother you." Ethan's grip tightened on the wheel. "Bother me? He's burning up, Maria. You don't wait with a kid like that." She flinched, and he regretted the words instantly. Sofia in the back seat piped up, her voice small. "Tia, is Luis gonna be okay?" Maria twisted to face her, forcing a smile. "He's strong, mija. Like you and Diego. The doctors will help." Diego, silent as ever, stared out the window, his hands clasped tightly. Ethan glanced at him in the rearview mirror, the boy's quietness unnerving. He remembered Maria's words. "Diego doesn't talk much since his mom died." The thought lodged in Ethan's chest, sharp and unwelcome. At the hospital, the emergency room was a chaos of fluorescent lights and clipped voices. Maria carried Luis, whispering to him in Spanish, while Ethan guided Sofia and Diego to a waiting area. A nurse took Luis for triage, and Maria followed, leaving Ethan with the older kids. Sofia clutched her rabbit, its ear now fully torn, and looked up at him. "You're the man from the big house," she said, more statement than question. Ethan nodded, unsure how to respond. "Yeah, I'm Ethan." Diego glanced at him, then away, his fingers tracing the edge of his sleeve. Ethan felt out of place, a billionaire in a tailored coat, surrounded by scuffed linoleum and worried faces. His phone buzzed again. Rachel texting, "Board meeting in 30. Press is slaughtering us. Where are you? He typed a quick reply. Tied up, handle it. Then he pocketed the phone, his eyes on Sophia, who was drawing circles on her palm with her finger. You like to draw, he said, remembering her painting at the community center. She nodded, shy. Tia says it makes bad things smaller. Ethan's throat tightened. He didn't know what to say to that. Maria returned, her face drawn. They're running tests. It's probably just a virus, but his fever's high. They want to keep him for observation. She sank into a chair, rubbing her eyes. Ethan noticed the shadows under them deeper than yesterday. How are you paying for this? He asked, his voice softer now. Maria's lips pressed into a thin line. I have a little saved. I'll figure it out. Ethan's jaw clenched. He'd seen the empty pill bottle in her bag, the thrift store clothes on the kids. She was drowning, and he knew it. Before he could respond, a woman in a gray blazer approached her badge reading Social Services. Ms. Alvarez, she said, her tone clipped. I'm Karen Ellis. We need to discuss the children's situation. Maria stiffened her hand, reaching for Sophia's. What about them? The social worker's eyes flicked to Ethan, then back to Maria. We've had reports of the children staying in unconventional places. Your employer's home, for one. We need to ensure their stability. If you can't provide a proper environment, we may need to explore foster care options. Maria's face went ashen. Foster care? No. They're with me. They're safe. Her voice trembled, but her grip on Sophia tightened. The social worker's expression softened, but her words were firm. I understand, but we have protocols. I'll need to visit your residence, assess the situation. If it's not suitable, we'll have to act. Ethan watched Maria's breathing quicken, her eyes darting to the kids. He saw the fear, the same fear he'd heard when she'd spoken of shelters. They're not going anywhere, he said, surprising himself. The social worker raised an eyebrow. And you are? Ethan straightened, his voice steady. Ethan Caldwell. Their guardian's employer. Maria shot him a look, confused but silent. The social worker nodded, jotting something down. We'll follow up soon, Ms. Alvarez. Keep us informed about Luis. She left, and Maria sagged, whispering, Thank you, sir. Ethan didn't respond, his mind racing. Why had he stepped in? This wasn't his fight. The hospital hallway felt stifling, so Ethan stepped outside the rain, cool against his face. He needed to think. The data breach was spiraling, his company's stock was tanking, and Twitter was a war zone of hashtags calling him out. But all he could see was Maria's face, the way she'd held Luis like he was the only thing keeping her upright. And that photo of Claire, his sister, at the community center. He needed answers. Back inside, he found Maria in the waiting area, Diego asleep against her shoulder, Sophia coloring on a hospital flyer. Tell me about the woman in the photo, Ethan said, his voice low. The one who looked like my sister. Maria's eyes widened, then softened with something like pity. Claire. She volunteered at the center years ago, helped with the kids' the art classes. She and Anna, my cousin, were close. She never mentioned a brother. Ethan's chest ached. We weren't close. She left after a fight. I didn't know she was here. Maria nodded, her voice gentle. She was kind. Broken, but kind. She stopped coming a few years ago. I didn't know why until later. Ethan turned away, the weight of her words sinking in. Claire in Seattle, living a life he'd never bothered to understand. His phone rang again, Rachel, this time leaving a voicemail. Ethan, the board's calling an emergency vote. You need to be here, or they'll push you out. He deleted it, his mind elsewhere. A nurse called Maria, back to see Luis, and Ethan followed, uninvited. In the exam room, Luis lay on a bed, an IV in his tiny arm. Maria stroked his hand, whispering, "Estás bien, pequeño." Ethan stood by the door, watching. A doctor explained the virus was treatable, but the bill would be steep. Maria nodded, her face blank, but Ethan saw her hands tremble. Without a word, he stepped into the hall, found a billing clerk, and paid the full amount anonymously using a credit card tied to a discreet account. He didn't know why, only that he couldn't let her beg for scraps. Back in the room, Maria looked at him, sensing something. "Why are you here, sir?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan didn't answer because he didn't know. The social worker's warning echoed in his head, along with Claire's face, Maria's sacrifice, and the kid's fragile trust. His phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't Rachel. It was an unknown number, a voicemail left while he'd been with the clerk. He played it, and a woman's voice, trembling but familiar, filled his ear. "Ethan, it's me. Claire. I know it's been years, but I need to tell you something. About Anna, about the kids." The message cut off, dated 3 years ago. Ethan's knees buckled. He leaned against the wall, the hospital's sterile hum fading. Claire had reached out, and he'd missed it. Maria watched him, her eyes searching. "Sir," she said softly. Ethan shook his head, unable to speak. The storm outside roared, but inside his world was cracking, and he wasn't sure he could hold it together much longer. The Seattle dawn broke with a rare softness, the clouds parting to let slivers of gold pierce the city's ever-present gray. Ethan Caldwell stood in his penthouse, the sleek lines of his home feeling less like a fortress and more like a shell he'd outgrown. The past week had unraveled him, Maria Alvarez's fierce loyalty, the children's fragile trust, and the voicemail from his sister Claire, a ghost from 3 years ago still echoing in his mind. Her words, cut off mid-sentence, had revealed a connection to Maria's cousin Anna and a plea he'd never answered. Ethan's empire at Caldwell Analytics was teetering, the data breach, fueling a PR nightmare, but the boardroom felt distant compared to the weight of what he'd learned. Claire had been here in Seattle, helping at the community center, living a life of quiet purpose, while he'd built walls of wealth and isolation. Now Maria faced a custody hearing for Sofia, Diego, and Luis, and Ethan found himself entangled in their fate, unable to walk away. The penthouse, once his sanctuary, hummed with a new energy, Sofia's crayon drawings taped to a fridge he'd never touched. Diego's toy cars lined up on a windowsill, Luis's soft babbling from a portable crib Maria had brought. Ethan hadn't fired her. Instead, he'd given her a week to find a solution, but that week was up, and he knew he couldn't send them back to a system that would swallow them whole. Maria stood in the kitchen packing a lunch for the kids, peanut butter sandwiches, apples, a few cookies she'd baked herself. Her movements were steady, but her eyes carried the weight of the looming hearing. "The social worker's coming tomorrow," she said, not looking at Ethan, who leaned against the counter, his tie loosened for once. "She'll decide if I can keep them." Ethan knotted his throat tight. "You will. I've got a lawyer lined up. Rachel recommended her best in the city." Maria's hands paused, her knife hovering over an apple. "A lawyer? Sir, I can't afford." Ethan cut her off, his voice firm, but not unkind. "It's covered. No arguments." Maria's eyes met his, searching, then softened. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan didn't answer right away. He didn't know how to explain the shift inside him, the way Claire's voicemail had cracked open a door he'd locked years ago. Instead, he said, "Because you're right. Some promises are worth breaking rules for." The day before, Ethan had sat in his study, replaying Claire's message, until the words blurred into static. "Ethan, it's me. Claire, I know it's been years, but I need to tell you something. About Anna, about the kids." The message had been sent 3 years ago when Claire was still alive. Before she'd slipped away, how he still didn't know. Maria had shared fragments. Claire had volunteered at the community center teaching art, helping Anna with the kids when their father vanished. She'd been broken, Maria said, but kind, always carrying a sadness Ethan now recognized as his own failure. He'd fought with Claire a decade ago over money, over their parents' estate, over his relentless ambition. She'd called him cold, walked away, and he'd let her. Now her voice lived in his phone, a reminder of what he'd lost. But there was something else in the message, a letter she'd said left for him at the center. Ethan had gone there that morning, the drizzle soaking his coat, as he dug through a box of Claire's things kept by the center's director. The letter was there in her looping handwriting, sealed in an envelope yellowed with time. He read it now, alone in his study, the kids' laughter filtering through the walls. "Ethan," it began, "I don't know if you'll ever see this. I'm not sure I want you to. But if you're reading this, maybe you're not as lost as I thought. I've been helping at a community center in Belltown with people who've shown me what family really means. Anna's kids. Sophia, Diego, Luis. They're special. Their mom's struggling, and I'm trying to help, but I'm running out of time. I'm sick, Ethan. Not long left. If you ever find your way back to being human, help them. Not with money, but with your heart. That's what matters." The letter ended abruptly, as if Claire had run out of strength. Ethan's hands shook as he folded it, the paper creasing under his grip. Sick. She'd been dying, and he'd been too busy building his empire to notice. The guilt was a blade sharp and unrelenting. Downstairs, Maria was getting the kids ready for the community center where they'd spend the day while she worked. Ethan joined them, surprising himself. "I'm coming with you," he said, pulling on his coat. Maria raised an eyebrow, but didn't argue. The center was alive with its usual chaos, kids painting seniors, chatting volunteers, bustling. Ethan watched Maria settle the kids into an art class, her smile soft as she handed Sophia a paintbrush. Diego still quiet stacked blocks nearby, while Luis napped in his stroller. Ethan's phone buzzed Rachel again. He stepped outside to answer. "Ethan, where the hell are you?" she snapped. "The board's losing it. The stock's down 15%. You need to address the press." Ethan glanced through the center's window where Sophia was showing Maria a blue handprint. "I'm handling something," he said. "Go public. Full transparency on the breach." "I'll take the hit." Rachel paused, stunned. "You're sure?" Ethan nodded, though she couldn't see. "It's the right call." He hung up the decision, lifting a weight he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. Back inside the center's director, a woman named Lila approached him. "You're Maria's boss, right? She's a blessing to this place." Ethan nodded, his eyes on Maria, who was laughing with Diego over a lopsided tower. "She is," he said the words, feeling true. Lila hesitated, then handed him a photo from the bulletin board, the one of Claire and Maria. "This was your sister, wasn't it? I saw the resemblance." Ethan's chest tightened. "Yeah, I didn't know she was here." Lila's face softened. "She loved those kids. Talked about you, sometimes said you were tough, but good deep down." Ethan looked away, the words stinging. He didn't feel good, not yet, but he wanted to try. The custody hearing was the next day in a sterile legal office downtown. Ethan sat beside Maria, the lawyer he'd hired, a sharp woman named Elena Carter, laying out Maria's case: stable employment, a clean record, and a plan to move into a small apartment with the kids funded by Ethan's discreet support. The social worker, Karen Ellis, listened, her face unreadable. Sophia and Diego sat quietly, Luis in Maria's lap. His fever gone, but his eyes still heavy. Elena presented letters from the community center testifying to Maria's dedication. Ethan spoke up unprompted. "I've seen Maria with these kids. She's their family. They're not going anywhere else." Karen raised an eyebrow, but nodded impressed. After an hour, she ruled in Maria's favor, pending a home visit. Maria's shoulders sagged with relief, tears spilling as she hugged the kids. Ethan felt a warmth he hadn't known in years. Back at the penthouse, Ethan made a decision. He converted a guest suite into a temporary space for Maria and the kids, with beds, toys, and a small desk for Sophia's drawings. "Until your apartment's ready," he said, handing Maria the key. Her eyes widened. "Sir, this is too much." Ethan shook his head. "It's not enough." He'd also contacted the community center pledging funds for a daycare program inspired by Maria's dream of a shelter for families like hers. The next morning, they went to a community garden near the center where the kids planted marigolds under a clearing sky. Sophia handed Ethan a trowel, her smile shy. "You plant one too," she said. He knelt dirt, smudging his pristine cuffs, and pressed a seedling into the earth. Diego watched, then handed him another. Luis toddled over, giggling, and Ethan laughed a real laugh, the first in years. As they worked, Maria stood beside him, her voice soft. "Claire would be proud of you." Ethan looked at her, the letter's words echoing, "Help them. With your heart." He nodded, his throat tight. "I hope so." The garden bloomed around them, a small patch of hope in a city of steel and rain. Ethan's phone stayed silent. No calls, no crises. For the first time, he didn't need to run. He was exactly where he was supposed to be.